Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Sports Fix podcast. Travis Hughes here, just me again this week. Looking to talk about some interesting potential for a lot of NFL teams this offseason. Before we get into that, though, just want to talk quickly about, it's almost tournament time. The March is coming up upon us, and college basketball is getting into probably one of the craziest times of the year. And, when people are fighting for seeding in their conference tournaments, as well as those that are on the bubble, I think this is a very interesting year with college basketball. There's a lot of teams that are up there in the top 5 or so, top 10. But outside of that, there's a lot of teams that are kind of questionable. I mean, I look at the bubble teams this year, and I'm not very impressed. But something I want to talk about I want to talk about some of the top 5 teams. Duke, number 1, lost this past week to North Carolina. They lost Zion Williamson, which probably played a role in that. And I really think that this comes up a really interesting question that a lot of people are asking, and a lot of people have asked in past, is what should Zion do? Should he sit out the rest of his season and get drafted number 1 in the NBA? Because, that's what's going to happen this year unless he suffers some major injury. Or should he come back and play and risk that injury, but he could help his team? And I really think that Duke team without Zion Williamson is not the number 1 team in the country. That team's not going to win a national championship without Zion on that court. He's such a difference maker for them. He's a great player that makes a huge impact on the court wherever he is. So I really think that was an interesting development this past week. Last Saturday, my Tennessee Volunteers went down to the Kentucky Wildcats. Pretty embarrassing fashion. To be honest, I hated losing to Kentucky, but I felt like this team, from my point of view, needed a loss. They'd been on such a big winning streak. They were getting complacent. You could tell in the way they played. There was not much energy. There wasn't much effort. They just kind of were sleepwalking through a lot of their games and still beating teams by double digits. So, I mean, that tells you how good this team can be. I think the problem with this team, though, is this isn't a team that's loaded with up and down talent that could go to the NBA. All 5 guys are not going to go to the NBA. I think there's a couple good prospects for the NBA, but they don't have a light switch. They're a team that they work really well under Coach Barnes in their system that they run, and each player has a role, and they meet that role, and because of their effort and their teamwork, they put out a outstanding performance on the basketball floor. I don't think any of these players are standouts, and that's why I think that they can't get complacent, because they don't have a light switch that they can turn on and off. They're probably going to be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, have a pretty good shot at winning the conference this year outright, and they can't get complacent. They have their hardest schedule going on right now. I mean, they lost to Kentucky at Rupp, which the score makes it look pretty bad, but Tennessee almost got it down to single digits. It was just fouling at the end that separated them so much. But I really thought Tennessee might only lose by single digits after playing so horribly in that game. And Kentucky, and give credit where credit's due, Kentucky deserved to win that game. They looked like the better team on the court. They had more desire, more will to win the game, and they deserve to win. I give them credit there, because Tennessee didn't bring it. And I'm not saying that if Tennessee did bring it that they would have won. I think they would have, but they might not have. Kentucky, that's still a very talented Kentucky team, and as much as I dislike the Kentucky Wildcats and uh, want the Vols to beat them, anyone who watched that game could see that Tennessee kind of was caught with their pants down. With that being said, Tennessee will have played LSU by the time this goes live, so I think that game will play a big part into is Tennessee playing well. This LSU team beat Kentucky. This is a quality LSU team that I think could beat Tennessee. I think Tennessee should go to Baton Rouge and win that game. I think they're good enough to do that. So hopefully, for my sake, the Tennessee Vols win. I already talked about Kentucky in the top five. Virginia is an interesting team in the top five that I think could compete for number one. The thing about Virginia is from what I've watched of them this year and what I've seen is it's a team that is very reliant on shutting you down on offense. They don't have to score 80 points in a game to win. They kind of get away with scoring 50 points. I think there was a game a couple weeks ago that was like that when they played, I think, NC State. I might be getting the wrong teams, but I think it was Virginia versus NC State where I think NC State scored like 20-something, 30-something points in the game. It was pretty insane. So I think Virginia's an interesting team. If you can get hot against Virginia, I don't think that's a team that can beat you. Louisville's going to provide a very interesting matchup for them today. Also, Gonzaga, I think, is a good, solid team. The thing is I don't think that there's one team that's separated themselves from the pack. Kentucky's lost 4 games. Granted, the LSU game was a bit interesting. The rest of their losses came towards a lot earlier in the season, and that's the thing with Calipari's teams is they're usually 4 or 5 freshmen All-Americans that come in and are knocking it out of the park individually, but they have a hard time gelling as a team at first. Once February and March start rolling around, they really improve in their play, and so I think Kentucky's another team that definitely could challenge for the national championship this year. If they have to, if they played every game like they played against Tennessee last Saturday, I think that they can beat most teams, if not every team in the country. Now Tennessee had brought their A+ game. It could have been a very different story. We don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in Thompson Bowling Arena when Kentucky comes to town in a week. So it'll be interesting to watch. It'll be interesting to see how this college basketball season turns out and how the conference championships and conference tournaments go. So moving on from college basketball into back to what we normally talk about, the NFL. And something, it's that time of season, it's like, well, what is there to talk about in the NFL? There really isn't that much. Well, I kind of want to take time to talk about each NFL team's offseason needs and moves that they can make to fill those needs. It's a very, NFL offseason is that very interesting to me, how teams manage cap situations, what they plan to do in the draft or free agency. Different teams have different philosophies. Do they want to go through the draft or do they want to pick up people in free agency? Like a team like the Patriots, they're a huge believer in the draft and finding these free agents that aren't big names and coming in and adapting them into Belichick's system. So this week we're going to talk about the Wests, the AFC West and the NFC West. And we'll start off with the AFC West. Now, something I think is really interesting about all these teams that I'm going to talk about today is I think all of these teams have a quarterback that can be serviceable. They're not going to go light the world on fire. I don't think they're going to go and break any passing records. But I think that all these teams have a quarterback that has proven at some point in their careers or has the potential to be someone who can lead a team to the playoffs. So I just want to say that I won't be talking about quarterbacks at all today, actually, which I thought was really interesting when I was doing my research on these stories. So number one, or AFC West to start off, and the Denver Broncos is the first team that I'm going to talk about. That team they're so close but so far at the same time. I think that they've got a lot of issues. I think they addressed some of those issues last offseason, and they've started to improve with Joe Flacco, or signing Joe Flacco, getting him to come in. I think that's a huge get for them, if assuming that they can turn him into something resembling his playoff and Super Bowl win. But I think that team, from what I've seen of them, number one need for them is offensive line. That is their number one priority for them, hands down. There's not a great amount of offensive linemen in free agency this offseason. I was looking at the free agency, or the available free agents, and I just wasn't very impressed. Everyone was over the age of 30, which you're not looking for. If you're the Broncos, you're looking for someone who can come in and help immediately and be able to stay and offer, this isn't a 1-year contract and you have a revolving door of offensive linemen every year. So an offensive lineman I was looking at is Trent Brown, the New England Patriots offensive tackle. Really, any of these teams that I bring up that have offensive line issues could... Really, I'm going to talk about different offensive linemen, different teams, but really, I mean, any of these teams could use these offensive linemen. These are just some that I have found that could be really good anchors for these teams. I think Trent Brown has been great at offensive tackle for the Patriots. He's a free agent. Patriots don't typically re-sign big name free agents. They would rather put their money somewhere else. And so I think Trent Brown would be a good pickup. I wanted them to get Nate Solder. I think that he would have been a great fit at Denver last offseason. They didn't get Nate Solder. I think that Trent Brown would be a great pickup for the Broncos at the offensive line position. But they need more than just one offensive tackle. They need probably 3 offensive linemen that can step in and be good. I think they've got Garrett Bowles is solid. I think they have some pieces. It feels like a lot of quality second stringers that they have on the offensive line. It's not great, but it's manageable. So just finding upgrades in those positions. Doesn't matter who the quarterback is in Denver, and I'm going to say this with every offensive line problem team. Nobody can throw to a open receiver if they don't have time, if they don't have a quarterback if they don't have an offensive line to stand behind, and they'll keep them upright more than 2 seconds. Secondly, I think the Broncos are okay at receiver, but I'd really like to see them go and make an offseason pickup. So someone I would like to see them get is from their division rival, LA Chargers, Tyrell Williams. He's a good playmaker for the Chargers, and I think that the Broncos could pick him up at a decent price. They wouldn't have to overpay for him. But that's weakening in a division team and making yourself stronger. And that's something that you've got to look to do in Denver when you're playing in such a tough division already. The Chargers and the Chiefs are, looking like they're perennial playoff teams right now. And the Raiders, I don't really know what's going on there with John Gruden, but if John Gruden can get his guys in there and get what's going on, they could be a team that could be competitive and hard to beat. So I think that they need just one other receiver that they can bring in and be a go-to guy other than Emmanuel Sanders, because Emmanuel Sanders feel like he was the only go-to guy. I think Courtland Sutton can be that guy that can step up and be a deep threat for them, can be a good receiver for them. Behind them, they don't have great depth, and I think bringing in one other receiver would at least give you. I mean, you're probably going to run with how good your running backs are. You probably want to do two receiver formations a lot of the time, and so if your two receivers are Tyrell Williams, Cortland Sutton, and Emmanuel Sanders just rotating in, I think that's a good rotation of guys that can do basically everything you need out of receivers. As well, I think that they need some higher quality defensive backs. I think their front seven is pretty good. They need to make some improvements, so they're not perfect, but I think their defensive backs are where they struggle a little bit. One guy I was looking at was Ronald Darby, Philly cornerback. I think he could come in and be a good player for them. We'll have to see what the Broncos do in this offseason. I think that this is a crucial offseason for John Elway, because if they have another 7-9 or worse season this year, it's gonna be a problem. John Elway's probably out of there. They got rid of Vance Joseph, and I think he was a lot of what was holding them back. Just not great offensive mind. So defensively, I think the Broncos are all right, but they need some help at defensive back. All right, moving on from the Denver Broncos, we've got the Kansas City Chiefs. That's my playoff or my Super Bowl predicted winner next season. Honestly, I think that they're going to win it all. With Patrick Mahomes only getting better, throwing for 50 touchdowns in your first full season playing. I think that's pretty impressive. But I think that something that they do need is the offense is pretty prolific. I don't think you need to go sign a running back. I think Damian Williams will do. You could go get a scat back like Darren Sproles, although I don't think he's. I think you will probably want someone a little younger. But I think that the Chiefs need defensive players. They need to find a. Basically, that defense was not great this past season. Eric Berry finally came back, which is a huge get for them. I think that they need more than just a safety to come in. I think their front seven can be pretty scary. I think but generally in their defense, they just need some filler players. They have superstars on defense. I think they have really good players. They just need some role players that can come in and not give up, a 30-yard run. They can come in and do their job. They're not going to get destroyed. They're not going to make any flashy plays. They're not going to do anything crazy, but they're going to get the job done. One guy, I think that you could go out and get he's not a superstar, I'd say, but a higher name player is Tyrann Mathieu. He's a defensive back for the Houston Texans. He's free agent this offseason. I think that would be a huge get for the Chiefs, who have solid corners but not great corners. I think that bringing Tyrann Mathieu could be a bolster to that defensive secondary and could help that team kind of make it to the next level. Next, we have the LA Chargers. This is an interesting one. I think Phillip Rivers is probably on his way out of the league. I think he's getting up there in age. It's hard for a quarterback that old to keep playing for so long. With that I think that the Chargers need to look at their drafting the quarterback of the future. We'll talk more about the draft later. I'll bring Tyler back on to talk more about the draft and who we think could go where. But I think that they need to look, or for now, I just say they need to look for a quarterback of the future. Potentially Drew Lock with the position they're in the draft. I think Drew Lock is a reasonable get that they could they could possibly get a mid to late first rounder. I think they also need to work on their run defense. Sony Michel tore them up in the playoffs, and I know that's just one game, but I think that a defensive lineman would be a great get for them. A guy that I was looking at is Grady Jarrett, a defensive lineman from Atlanta. I think that would be a good get for them. That could help shore up that defensive run defense. And I think that their linebackers are fantastic. I think their secondary is pretty good. I think that was really all they needed was a little something on the defensive line to help shore up their defensive that run defense. They're not a perfect team. The thing is, though, I don't see any glaring weaknesses in them either. They're a pretty solid all-around team. They're not great at, they're not fantastic in any specific area. I think Melvin Gordon's a great running back for them. I think they've got a good cast of receivers. I think that they've got some great defensive players. I just feel like that they don't excel and put themselves apart in any specific category. I think that that's the problem that the Chargers have. They've got good players. They don't have fantastic, great, go win the Super Bowl players. So that's just something that's going to have, you usually address that in the draft, but free agency is a lot of hole filling, and I just don't see many glaring holes in the Chargers team. A team I do see a lot of holes in, though, is the Oakland Raiders. That's a very interesting situation there. They sign John Gruden to a 10-year coaching contract. He gets there, and he gets to Oakland and basically runs that team. Well, he trades all their good players, and granted, he has a lot of first-round picks. He has a lot of options to pick who he wants in this draft. But I really think that was a huge... I mean, giving up Khalil Mack, that guy can be the staple of a defense. You saw how massive he was for the Bears this season. I really am not sure where to start with the Oakland Raiders, but something I'm a big believer in is starting in the trenches when you're trying to rebuild a team. It's not easy to build a team from nothing, where John Gruden's kind of got it right now. It's not a great situation that team is in. I think starting at the offensive and defensive line is the best way that you're going to be able to start a team again, start building a team. Derek Carr has proved that he can come in and be a good quarterback in the league. Last season didn't do him much good, but he didn't have an offensive line whatsoever. There's a lot of injuries on that team. There was a lot of problems on that team. And so I really think that starting in the trenches is something for that team. I looked at their defensive roster and I had no clue who most of those players were. It's just a bunch of no names that can do decent at times. That's a team that I feel like could, if they wanted to try to get Le'Veon Bell, I think that's a team that could benefit from it. They don't have a standout running back. They've got solid Doug Martin, solid. I think his backup is Jalen Richards, I think is his name. It's solid teams or solid players, but a Le'Veon Bell pickup could be good for them. As far as in the trenches, like I had originally said, Trey Flowers, New England defensive lineman, and Donovan Smith, left tackle out of Tampa Bay, I think could be good anchors. I think those guys can be something that you can build around. We'll see what John Gruden does with the Raiders, especially in the draft. I think that they probably aren't going to be relevant for another 2 to 3 years, and that's if John Gruden builds that team the way he wants to and gets them on the track that he has imagined. I don't know if he'll do it. I'm not 100% sure if I believe he'll do it, but if he does, I think it'll take 2 to 3 years to do. So that's the AFC West. Jumping into the NFC West, we'll start with the Arizona Cardinals. That's another team like the Raiders. There's just a lot going on there. I've heard a lot of rumors that they might try to trade Josh Rosen or get rid of Josh Rosen and use the number one draft pick this year. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I don't know what's going on with Josh Rosen from a mental standpoint or what's going on behind the scenes with him. I don't know any of that information, but as a pure talent, I think the guy can play quarterback in the NFL. He didn't do great, but he had no offensive line whatsoever to stand behind. David Johnson's a good running back that they don't need to go and find a running back for him, and so I really think that the offensive line is a huge place of need for them. The defense is okay. It's not a great defense, but it's okay, and I really think you need some receivers. Larry Fitzgerald is all that Josh Rosen had last year, and Larry Fitzgerald's like 36, so I don't think he's going to be playing receiver in the NFL very much longer. It's not looking like a very high probability. So something I would suggest is, or I would think the Cardinals should do, is I don't really see anyone at the number one overall pick right now that they should go for. I could be wrong, but I'd be looking to trade down from that number one pick. I don't think you want to take an offensive lineman or a receiver in the number one overall pick. You want a team. You have teams that want a quarterback so bad that they will trade a lot to get that number one seed, even if you only have to drop down to like number 5, number 6, number 7. And maybe get a second or third round draft pick out of it too. And so you can get multiple picks for this number one overall spot. I think that might be the way that the Cardinals need to go with that pick, because I think you've got your quarterback. I think you have a good running back, and you just have a lot of pieces that it's going to be a waste of a draft pick to draft in the top 5. So I think for the Cardinals, the big thing is to trade down. And a free agent that I would consider looking at is Jamison Crowder, receiver from the Redskins. That is a solid receiver. He can come in. He's not going to replace Larry Fitzgerald. He's not going to be the next Larry Fitzgerald by any stretch of the imagination. He's not great, but he will. He's good enough to come in and be a weapon. He can be a weapon for Josh Rosen, someone he can get the ball off to. That's really it for the Cardinals. The Rams I think it's really interesting because I think in my predictions I picked. I picked the Bears. I think the Rams will do well next year. I think the Rams, what they need to do is basically shore up their team. They need to keep a lot of their pieces. Ndamukong Suh might be someone you get rid of. I think he's a big problem with your cap. He's solid. He did pretty well in the playoffs, but he didn't provide much to your team in the regular season. I think that's a player you could maybe get some trade value or some cap value out of. But other than that, I really think that team doesn't need a whole lot. I think that they're pretty solid. They're pretty good team. They don't need to make any major pickups. I think maybe the offensive line might need, one or two new faces, but it's hard to criticize a team that made the Super Bowl. Granted, they didn't look great in the Super Bowl, but even then, I couldn't even point out what was wrong with them in the Super Bowl. I think that it was just kind of a weird defensive game. So I don't have much on the Rams, but I do think that they could maybe get rid of a Ndamukong Suh, a big name who's drawn a big contract, who you could get value out of. Also, I think that's really it for the Rams. But with the 49ers, I think this is a very interesting team. The 49ers traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, not last season, but 2 seasons ago. And when he played for them, he went 6-0, and they didn't lose a game with him at quarterback. And of course, they're not going to never lose a game with Jimmy Garoppolo at the helm. But he got injured in the 3rd game this year, and they had to fall back on their backup C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins came in and actually did a pretty decent job. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a starting quarterback there. I think that's a very interesting situation. They've got a good running back in Matt Breida. They've got a great tight end in George Kittle. They've got a defense that's solid, not great, but solid. And I really think that team needs some interior offensive linemen and a wide receiver other than Marquise Goodwin. Even then, he wasn't that great last season, but he's proven that he can be a solid receiver for them. They need someone else, though. There's just no playmakers on the offensive side of the ball, and they need those playmakers. So I think they go get the offensive lineman. They go get the playmakers. Brashad Perriman was someone I was looking at as a possible guy who could come in for the 49ers. That was a team, though, that they kind of, I wouldn't say they got hot at the end of the season, but they kind of started to figure things out. I think that's a team with the talent and the coaching staff that they have could make a turnaround this upcoming season. And finally, we have the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, there's been a lot of rumors lately that Russell Wilson, their quarterback, might go to the New York Giants. That is a huge priority for the Seahawks, unless he's asking for insane contracts like Matthew Stafford was asking for, Derek Carr got. Unless they're he's asking for a massive contract like that, you got to re-sign Russell Wilson. You don't get franchise quarterbacks, that come very often. It could be 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks they go through before they find their next guy. And I really think that Russell Wilson is the guy for them there, and they need to focus on re-signing him. I don't think they should overpay for him, but I think that they should really prioritize re-signing him, because history has shown that if you overpay a quarterback, your team doesn't do well. There's only one team that's, I think, pays the... I heard a statistic that there's only one team that ever had a quarterback paid over $20 million only one time that a quarterback paid over $20 million won the Super Bowl, and it's Tom Brady. And, to be honest, the guy deserves a paycheck. So I think unless he's asking for $25-30 million, he's asking for Kirk Cousins money, you just can't pay it. You gotta move on from him, because you're not going to be successful overpaying for a quarterback. So I think that team really, their offense is all right. They've got a running back by committee with Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. They're good enough. They've got a good receiving core. Their offensive lineman is serviceable. It could use some tuning up, some fixing. But I think the defense is going to need to be a huge focus for the Seahawks. You're probably going to lose Earl Thomas this offseason. There's a lot of guys who you're probably just not going to have this next season, and their defense was kind of questionable as is. A couple guys that I'm looking at for them is Bradley Roby, corner out of Denver. He's not great. He's not done anything fantastic with the Broncos of late, but he was a solid guy that he wasn't. He didn't give up tons of huge plays and didn't blow games for them. And so I think that could be a solid pickup for them. I also think C.J. Mosley, the linebacker out of Baltimore, could be a good pickup for them. They need some help at linebacker. They need some depth there. And we don't know how Shaquem Griffin's going to do. That was their big pickup last offseason in the draft. They got they got Shaquem Griffin, the one-handed player out of UCF. And, you don't know how well he's going to perform. I want to see the guy succeed. I actually really like his story. I really like him. So I would like to see how he can do in the NFL. I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. But really that wraps up what I have to say on the AFC and NFC West. I think there's a lot of I think AFC West has a lot of potential for quality teams. I think the NFC West, it's kind of LA and everyone else. The Seahawks can, if they make the right offseason moves, they can be competitive for a Super Bowl next season. I think the 49ers have another season to go for that. I think the Cardinals are a couple seasons off for that. But the AFC West looks, I think the Broncos, if they have a good offseason, they could be in the playoffs. The Chiefs are going to be in the playoffs. The Chargers could be in the playoffs. The Raiders, it depends on how well their draft and offseason is. I don't think it's going to be that good, but I think that team could go probably, the ceiling for that team is probably 8-8. That's probably your ceiling for next season, which, isn't, it's solid, especially for a team that's struggled like that team has. We saw how much a 7-8-1 or 8-7-1 season for the Browns, how much that meant to those fans. That it happens when you only win like 2 games in 3 seasons. Pretty ridiculous. But excuse me. That's gonna wrap it up for the NFL talk today, as well as for our show. If there's any offseason moves that you guys think that should happen, or teams that you think could be competitive next year, or even let's talk. You can even comment on college basketball. Who do you think's probably got the best shot of winning the March Madness tournament, the national championship? What do you guys think's gonna happen? And do you think Duke can compete without Zion? Do you even think Zion's gonna come back? Is that gonna be a possibility? Do you think he could potentially come back? I don't know, but that's gonna wrap it up for me. Signing off for the Sports Fix, and we'll see you next week, everybody.